Did you guys know UGREEN just shadow dropped a value series NAS solution? I know, right? About 2 months ago, at the time of recording, UGREEN listed on Amazon, a couple of other retailers, and indeed their own website, a brand new 4-bay NAS solution, and didn't tell anyone. It appeared, people had noticed it on Reddit and a few other web pages, and it wasn't until Prime Day, when the website, the UGREEN website was doing a bunch of promos, that people actually started noticing this thing. And I managed to get hold of one, and in this video, we're going to talk about whether it's actually any good. How does it stack up, not only against their existing DXP series and NAS devices, but also how it stacks up against the likes of Synology, QNAP, Asustor, and more. Ultimately, do you need a value series device? What are you losing out on this system? So let's get to grips with it. Now, normally, when I talk about a NAS solution as a much more value budget focus, and I talk a lot about NAS, let's be honest, I normally don't talk a lot about the hardware. And when I do, it's like the last third of the video, because this is about simple, easy storage access, cloud comparable. But I'm going to change things up a little bit here, because I think it's really important to understand not only the value, but the hardware value on this. So the price tag for this is about $350.
I need about $350.
About $350 to $400. I say that because it's listed on a few different websites, some of which involve a discount like UGREEN's own website, but that might not be permanent. So I'm going to say about $350 to $400 without the tax. Now, for that, you're getting an ARM-powered NAS solution with 2.5 gig there on the rear, and it's a 4-bay supporting RAID, and it's got the software on board. But more precisely, this is a value series device to line up against their Intel higher powered range of solutions. Now, that isn't new. The likes of Synology and QNAP and more have done that for a long time. Indeed, right now, at the time of recording, a similarly priced value series device would be, say from Synology, the DS423+. That rocks around for the mid 400s, even close to 500 mark in some places. Then you've got the QNAP TS433, another $400 or so NAS solution. And from Asustor, you've got things like their DriveStor 4 Pro series, all of which are 4-bay value series NAS devices, all running on an ARM processor. So this is entering a crowded marketplace. What exactly is it bringing to the table? Well, that's why I want to talk about hardware. Because yes, it's a 4-bay NAS solution, something we'll talk about later on, but on top of that, it's got an 8-core ARM-based CPU. Now, this is a ROC chip, the RK3588C, a CPU we've seen escalating and being used in a few DIY NAS solutions recently, but not on many actual turnkey NAS solutions. It's technically 2 CPUs. It is a Cortex A55 ARM processor, and it's an A57 ARM processor with an MPU on board, up to 6 tera operations per second. Now, to put that into perspective, that alongside it arriving with 8 gig of DDR5 memory and the operating system running from an independent 32 gig eMMC module inside for the non-tech versed. That is a serious amount of base hardware for a value NAS, when value NASs are generally reserved to be for low-level streaming, very low-level backups, or to add on to an existing network backup. Most value NASs are scaled significantly lower than that at this hardware price. For example, that Synology I mentioned, which is more expensive, that runs on a quad-core ARM RTD's 1619B CPU with 2 gig of non-upgradable memory and 1 gig on the rear in terms of network connectivity. It costs more with a lower base hardware. The QNAP there has got a Cortex A55 quad-core processor. It's got a little bit more memory, but that's fixed. And although the QNAP has got 2.5 gig, this has got 2.5 gig as well. So at least between the two of them, it's a little bit more level pegging, but there's a better base level hardware for the CPU, the memory, and integrated OS on its own drive, rather than reading from those 4 drives inside. Even the Asustor, which has got a similar CPU to that of the Synology, again has a higher base software in terms of memory, and it arrives with 2.5 gig out the gate. But ultimately, this has outclassed most of those by providing not only a similar CPU, identical in cases, but better in terms of architecture, in terms of core, and in terms of graphical capabilities. A much higher frequency overall in terms of clock speed at 2.4, much higher support of multimedia going up to 8K thanks to those Mali graphics. Again, general clock up to 2.4 and higher integrated graphics mean, and that is why I talk about the hardware at the top, as a value proposition NAS, which is what this is being classed as, is actually an impressive base hardware compared to the market trend. But that's enough about the technicals. I'm sorry to front load a value series NAS video with technicals. Let's crack on. In terms of design, they've changed things up a little bit here. It doesn't use traditional trays. They're all slide inside. We'll go about that in a minute. We've got ventilation there on that side, ventilation on that side, a base fan, the only fan inside the system, and the rear of the removable magnetic top panel has its own ventilation there at the top. Now, drives are injected vertically. So if we have a look inside that removable case with the first time setup 3D barcode inside, there at the top we've got our individual bays there, all 4 storage bays there, and drives themselves are slotted in like so. So we put them in, again they're injected directly into the back plane there. You can use whatever drives you want, so this has been tested up to 30 TB. The trays are pretty plasticky, not gonna lie, they don't feel great. But they do have a nice little spring vibration thing, and they've got some rubber there at the end, which I'm assuming dampen things a little bit in terms of noise when the system is in operation. It feeds into 4 individual SATA connectors inside, not loose cables, not a big surprise, onto a mesh ventilated panel where the fan and the motherboard is located at the base. But it's the ports and connectivity that I want to talk about that I really like. So for example, we've got a USB-C there on the front, not that unusual these days, and it's a 5 gig USB, again not unusual for an ARM processor NAS, but it has 2 10 gig USBs, which on an ARM is pretty unusual. Indeed, so is an HDMI output on a value series NAS. Remember all of those NASs I mentioned just now from other brands? None of them have HDMI out. This one does, and it supports up to 8K as well. Now, as good as all that sounds, there is only one network port, and it's 2.5 gig. So on the one hand, I'm pleased it's 2.5 gig, but it's still only one port. So you've got no failover, you don't have the ability to scale out, and that's still going to serve as a bottleneck for those 4 hard drive SATA bays inside. There's no M.2 slots either, not a huge surprise for an ARM-powered NAS, but still nonetheless, would have liked to have seen at least 2.5 gig and a 1 gig port there, or maybe 2 times 2.5 gig. Not unusual, but still nonetheless, one port there. Unless they're running out of lane substantially, and I know ARM processors can be problematic, a bit of a limit. But what about when the device is in operation? Let's talk noise, let's talk power, let's talk thermals. Noise up first. Now I tested the noise in 3 different scenarios there. I went ahead with utilising the device in low, almost between 0 and 5% CPU utilisation, and the drives in idle, and I achieved 37 to 39 dBA with the system just sitting there in idle after 15 minutes left untouched. After that I went into the system remaining in idle, but the fan being adjusted to maximum speed, and that went up to 44 to 45 dBA over time. Finally, I set the system's fans back down to standard, but this time I went ahead and regularly accessed all of the drive media, even connected to USB, and at that point the noise reached 38 to 40 dBA. So let's hear those independently now. Now, obviously, the drives you choose to use are going to make a big difference. The more enterprisey the drives are, the more noise they make. But still, those 3 readings there in terms of audio levels aren't too shabby to me. So let's talk about power consumption. I've got 4 different power states to talk about here. So number 1, there was the system in complete idle with no hard drives inside. So just reading from the internal eMMC/OS SSD, and it was drawing just 4.6 to 4.7 watts there. Obviously unrealistic with no hard drives inside. So after that, I made over to setting the device in idle still, low CPU, but also with hard drive sitting in idle as well. With 4 Seagate 4TB iron walls, the power consumption went up between 21 and 22 watts. Now next, I went ahead with a kind of heavy load there. That was a hard drive being accessed, and the CPU sitting around 50 to 60% utilization, and that's where the went up to about 34 to 35 watts. Again, keep in mind this isn't peak, this is just when the device this is peak and not 24/7. Very few users are going to use a system like this in peak for that level. But instead, I then, for my final test, went ahead with very low hard drive use there in the background, but I went with 100% CPU utilization. That was a couple of soft transcoded 8K or so, one 8K, one 4K file. So that ended up being slightly lower than the heavy hard drive active load at around 30 to 31 watts. So overall, pretty good numbers there in terms of power consumption for a value series NAS, bearing in mind it's a 4-bay, and for the test that we were performing. So what about thermals? What was the impact in terms of heat? So after 24 hours of intermittent use and performing the test that I've described just now, the thermals were as follow. After 24 hours, the surrounding casing to the chassis there, again all sides and the lid, went to around 38 to 39 degrees there. So not too shabby, I would say. Again, how much of that heat was leaving the system. Drawing those courses, I could see that the CPU, when it was reaching peak, because it is an ARM-based CPU, which use much more reduced lines of code, that's why you normally find CPUs like this on mobile systems, where they compress instruction in a way that a normal highfalutin CPU would. The hard drives during that 24-hour period actually hit around 44 to 45 degrees. Again, respectable numbers. If I'd used chunkier drives that filled in more of the cavities there, it might have been a bit higher. But overall, not too shabby in numbers. I do think this system could stand to perhaps have some ventilation there on the top as air is being drawn through the system, but there may be reasons that I'm not seeing that testing would have shown that that's not necessary. And at the very least, I did add ventilation to the back of the panel as well to draw heat up the back, perhaps. Now, the base panel there where the CPU, the fan and everything was, that only hit around 42 to 44 degrees. So overall, after 24 hours of intermittent hourly access and my peak testing, I'm quite happy with those numbers. Next up, the software. We talked about UGOS before, and although UGOS definitely ain't DSM, it definitely ain't QUTS, and it definitely ain't ADM, I would argue they are coming forward quite a lot. And as this is an ARM-based CPU, there are some features that are missing that I'll talk about in a bit. But if you've used UGOS before or seen reviews of their software, I would say the bulk of the currently available features and services are on there. So, multi-tier backups, be they USB, internal system, or cloud and SMB backups are supported there. Multimedia streaming and playback across photos, across video, across music is there. AI photo recognition, thing recognition, object recognition, facial recognition, with multiple options available to you there, thanks to a CPU with a little bit more TOOPS, or terror operations per second, supported under the bonnet. File folder management there. We could talk about the snapshot support there. We could talk about the multi-factor authentication now finally added. There's even support of Docker on there, as well as scheduled on, off and air gapping options included. And with the theatre application in conjunction with the HDMI output, as well as media streaming applications for music built in natively and DLNA and UPnP, there's a lot of features here. Now again, an ARM-based CPU, there's just things it can't do. And I'm pleased it's got Docker and BTRFS support. You're never going to get VMs running on this. It just isn't. You don't get high-spec or even mid-spec VMs running on an ARM processor with ease. On top of that, there's no support of iSCSI there. But weirdly, there was no native Jellyfin app, even though traditional UGOS has a native Jellyfin app. And I could get Jellyfin working on this via Docker, which you'll see in a moment. It was weird there wasn't a native app, which, by the way, is just a Docker wrapped container anyway. Their software is still not going to change the market right now. It's good, and they're nailing down the fundamentals and they're building from it. But just keep in mind, this is a value series NAS, and that software is still not right now anywhere near as competitive as the likes of DSM and QUTS. And for those looking at this for multimedia, I went in with Jellyfin, set up Jellyfin and did some testing across the board with 1080p, 4K and 8K files. Now, I will say this did play 8K. And when I played 8K natively, it was all right, but that CPU was at 70 to 75% when I was playing native. When I needed to convert the files, either automatically or selective transcoding there, the CPU was hitting 100% for the 8K stuff. So although it does support 8K, I don't think I would recommend this even for native 8K. When it came to 1080p and 4K, it did actually a pretty darn good job, both with and without transcoding. It is still ARM-based transcoding. It's nowhere near as aggressive as like an Intel processor with quick sync out the gate, but still, Jellyfin setup was smooth. Playing natively for 1080p and 4K was pretty darn good at transcoding. Still pretty good. 8K, I just wouldn't really include it there. But that's only it. It is a value series NAS. I still don't quite understand why UGREEN have shadow dropped this. It's as solid as their other products. It's as perfect and as flawed as anything else that they put out there. You know, I would say lower your expectations. It is a value series device, but above and beyond that, if you're looking to have an extra tier to your local SMB backups, if you're looking for a low-level multimedia streaming device, and you're looking for an affordable, turnkey, low-impact, low-heat, low-noise NAS solution, It's quite easy to recommend. It ain't Synology, but it ain't trying to be. And I think for some of you, that's a good thing. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Now, I'm going to do a written review about this. I'm going to do a few more bits of experimentation with it because I'm quite interested in that CPU and just what they've eked out of it. But let me know what you guys think. Have you got hold of one of these? Are you thinking about it? Is this going to assuage you from buying a bigger boy UGREEN NAS or maybe one of the competitor devices out there? Let me know. Now, apart from that, if you found this video helpful, and if you're thinking of buying this product, and if you were going to go to the retailers listed in the description, please use those links in order to do so. Using those links in the description will allow me and Eddie to keep doing what we do here at NAS Compares. We get a small commission and it goes directly back into the channel. We don't do the whole like, subscribe, begging thing. We don't. But passive commission like that helps us to keep doing what we do. Use it, ignore it. It's really up to you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.